Final point on the inferior function, or the fourth function. It's been given a lot of other names and a lot of other titles, but they're kind of poetic, so I don't use them as much. You can look up Linda Barron's or John Beebe's work. You can look up Model A in Socionics. These are all different versions and different approaches to the function stack, defining them and talking about their character. And none of them are wrong. You're all just looking at different facets and aspects of this. I'm not trying to lay down any orthodoxy here. I'm just giving you another angle. Fourth function, inferior function. It's the counterpart to the dominant function, and it's our weakest conscious function. There's a sense in which you could argue that that all of us, all types, not just INTPs, have less confidence and competence with our inferior function than with our top two shadow functions. And some models do seek to reflect that. So, but nevertheless, even though our inferior function may be weaker than the top two shadow functions, in the case of the INTP, extroverted thinking or introverted intuition, it is more present in our life. We are more aware of it. It is a common point of anxiety or difficulty. We care that we fail at this in a way that we don't as much with our shadow functions, which we're kind of, as we'll discuss later, ignoring. It's crucial, however, not to ignore our inferior function, and I think that might be the single most important takeaway from Jungian typology is the complementarity of the inferior and the dominant function, targeting the dominant at the inferior, not ignoring or having contempt for the inferior. It's a critical error. Our interest in the inferior function increases as we get older, as we mature, as does our compatibility with types that use this function. So if you're from Socionics and you've heard of duality in Socionics, I think that that's a relationship that probably works better when both parties are over 25. It can work if you've got like an arranged marriage or forced circumstances or something like that, but I think as we age, we appreciate our inferior more naturally. We can experience feelings of contempt in youth and distrust around this function, even into our adulthood, if underdeveloped. And this is, again, critical error. Don't fall into that trap. All types will seek advice from and seek greater competence in their inferior function, no matter what type they are. And Jung did talk a good deal about the inferior function in those in its indirect terms and its dynamics and the influence on the personality, again attributing its formation to repression in favor of the dominant function, which is its opposite in orientation. And development of the inferior is the key, in my opinion, to being a well-rounded example of one's type instead of a walking stereotype. Last section, honing in on extroverted feeling for INTPs. Specifically, it is a weak point, but not the weakest point in the INTP psyche. It is the complement to TI, introverted thinking, and more often than not works with or within its framework. This is something that I think once your eyes are open to, it's hard to unsee. XXTP types always have a sort of nascent social consciousness or opinions about society, some forming into like great technocratic world plans or like world controller plans, socialism, and what do you say, the Venus Project and resource-based economy, all these kind of technocratic world order systems will sometimes, I think a lot of these are, that TI not only produces this, but it's easy for TI to fall into this. And I think that that's a quality or an expression of the complementary inferior extroverted feeling. And I think that it's appropriate for the FJ types, the types that are FE into TI, to look at that as kind of crude, and in some cases maybe naive, because our image of people is being formed by a relatively weak process. Extroverted feeling is the expressive side of emotionality. So this means, and this is an interesting dynamic, that higher feeling types can often seem less emotional than TI dominant types or TI auxiliary types because their feeling is introverted. So an NFP or an SFP type might be feeling super intense emotions, but because they're introverted feelers, they don't show it, or maybe they don't want to. Whereas a type that's high thinking might be really explosive, red in the face, all of that because the emotion the emotional process is driven outward by the fact that the thinking process is pointed inward. So I've noticed that yes, oftentimes there's more emotional expression in thinking types that are extroverted feeling rather than feeling types that are introverted feeling, even in the case of introverted feeling dominance. Not always, but more often than you would think, and wouldn't not something you would expect looking at the exterior without knowing the theory behind it. Because it's inferior extroverted feeling for INTPs and obviously ISTPs, this applies to as well. Well, because it's inferior, it's easy to overwhelm the function, and also it's satisfied very easily. It's like a small glass, so you overheat quickly, you overload quickly, you have less control over this function as a TI dominant. But at the same time, I don't think we have the same need for it. I think that very superficial social relations or a very minimal amount of social relations can leave us okay, can leave us satisfied. It's like we have a band on our emotional stomach or something like that. Let's close this out. It's not naturally preferred, obviously, for reasons that should be pretty clear and self-evident at this point in the presentation. It's considered an annoyance, especially in an INTP's youth, but this is a crucial error. You do not want to be annoyed by extroverted feeling, but you want to figure out how to understand it, how to adapt to it, how to find it within yourself, and find what of that introverted thinking content that seems to produce itself automatically can find a place in the world of extroverted feeling. That's going to be the key to feeling like you've done something meaningful or had a satisfactory effect on the world as an INTP or an ISTP. You want to find that subset of introverted thinking content that fits in with the extroverted feeling context. Both INTPs, ISTPs, and the introverted feeling dominant types, INFPs and ISFPs, have a cut against the grain, kind of, go against the herd quality, and that is attributable to inferior feeling or inferior thinking in the case of the INFP and ISFP. But that's not always a bad thing. That is the function of introverted judgment, to sort of judge the judgment of the crowd, to sit back from the crowd and say, what do I think about what they think? And without that very critical editing process, I can imagine society going off the rails. So just know that happens because of the relationship of introverted judgment to extroverted judgment. You're not necessarily being a stick in the mud you're being a stick in the mud, but not necessarily for a bad reason. Extroversion, again, finally, means no matter how little, the orientation will be outward. So even though extroverted feeling is the inferior function of the INTP and ISTP, you'll still see it. And you'll see it in a way you won't necessarily see it with the introverted feeling types. I hope that has elucidated some things for you, whether you are an INTP or not. Stay tuned. Please subscribe, like, and share, and all that good stuff. The shadow functions of the INTP will be coming in the future, but more than likely, my wild extroverted intuition will bounce upon a couple of other topics before then. Have a great morning, day, noon, evening, night, wherever it is you are, whenever it is you are, and thanks again for watching.